On some Christmas nights, the past doesn't stay politely in the past. It walks back into the room, sits down in the best chair, and reminds you that love and grief don't always accept their endings. Tonight, we're going back to the mid-1800s, to a red brick house on the edge of St. Thomas, Ontario. A family named Flanagan moved in for the holidays, thinking they'd bought a quiet place to build a future. The house had been empty for years. The bricks were weathered, the shutters crooked, and the lane leading up to it looked more like a path people had stopped using than a welcome. Still, on paper, it was perfect. Solid walls, good land, enough rooms for a growing family, enough distance from town to be peaceful, but not so far that you felt cut off from the world. The Flanagans arrived just before Christmas. They brought furniture, trunks, simple decorations, and all the small hopes people carry into a new home without saying them out loud. Like many old houses, this one came with traces of the people who'd lived there before. A forgotten chair, a cracked picture frame, a few odd items no one had bothered to take. At first, nothing felt supernatural, just the chaos of moving. Doors that stuck, floorboards that groaned when you walked over them, cold spots where the wind found its way through old brick and bad caulking. Then, quietly, the house began to answer back. It started with small noises, faint tapping inside the walls, as if someone were running fingers along the plaster. Little knocks at odd hours, never quite loud enough to justify waking everyone up. Objects didn't always stay where the family left them. A book that had been on the table turned up on the floor. A hairbrush moved from a dresser to a chair across the room. In the beginning, every strange moment had an easy explanation. Someone must have knocked the brush. Someone must have forgotten where they put the book. Moving is exhausting. As the days moved toward Christmas, the sounds grew bolder. The tapping turned into heavier thumps, traveling from one room to another, as if following an invisible route. Sometimes the family heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway, but when they went to look, the corridor was empty and still. Small items didn't just turn up, move. They began to shift in front of people. An ornament on a shelf trembled on its own and slid a few inches before falling to the floor. It wasn't dramatic poltergeist chaos. No furniture lifted itself. No doors slammed on command. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse, like someone testing what they could get away with. Then the children started to dream. They woke from nightmares, not with ordinary fear, but with the heavy certainty that something bad was coming. Not to the world, not to the town, specifically to their house. Different children used different words, but the feeling was the same. A disaster on its way. A threat you couldn't see yet, like thunder that hasn't reached you but is already rolling. During the day, they seemed unchanged at first. They played, they argued, they helped hang greenery for Christmas. But every so often, one would stop, look around the room, and go quiet in a way that adults notice. The parents tried to steady the house with routine. Meals at the same time, candles lit in the same corners, prayers said with the same words. Humans build patterns to keep the strange at bay. But routine doesn't always help when the strange lives inside the walls. As Christmas Eve approached, the activity climbed. The knocks grew sharper. The tapping sometimes spiked into a run of rapid bangs, as if someone sprinted unseen along the hallway. Objects shook. A chair scraped half an inch across the floor with no one touching it. A door that had been firmly shut eased itself open, just enough to show the dark beyond. The house no longer felt only old. It felt occupied in a way no head count could explain. Christmas Eve arrived with snow on the ground and tension in the air. The Flanagans gathered in the parlor, the warmest room in the house, to ride out the night together. The lamps were lit. The fire, if they had one, burned low. Shadows climbed the walls like extra guests. The family talked quietly, trying not to notice how often they glanced at the doorway. At some point, the air in the room changed. People often describe this the same way. The sense that someone has just walked in, even before you see them. In the space between one breath and the next, they saw him. A tall, dark, hooded figure stood in the parlor. Not a blur at the edge of vision, not a trick of the light. A full, human-sized presence, cloaked and still, exactly where no one should have been standing. His hood hid his face. What the family remembered was the way his shoulders seemed slightly hunched, as if drawn in by a weight that wasn't physical. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't lunge. He did something much stranger. He simply stood there, like someone who had walked into the wrong house and realized it too late. The room fell absolutely silent. No one wanted to be the first to move, in case movement broke whatever fragile balance was keeping him still. The longer they looked, the more a specific feeling built around him. Not rage, not malice, but sorrow. A sense that whoever he had been, he was grieving something he could not get back. Some later tellings say his shoulders shook as if he was quietly crying. Whether that's memory or interpretation, the impression was the same. This was not a happy spirit. Time twisted. Seconds stretched thin. No one remembers exactly how long he stood there, only that it felt long enough to leave a mark on every person in the room. And then he was gone. Not with footsteps, not with a door opening. One moment, the hooded man stood in the parlor. The next moment, the space he had occupied was empty, like a breath taken back. The house was exactly as it had been. The same furniture, the same light, the same cold corners. The only difference was that every person in that room now had a memory they did not know how to live with. In the months and years that followed, the story of that Christmas Eve traveled beyond the Flanagan family. It slipped out into town, into retellings, into the kind of local lore that lives in kitchens and at bar counters. As people talked, they started to attach a history to the figure. According to some versions, the house had once belonged to another family whose father had built it for the love of his life. In that story, she died first. He stayed behind, alone in the house he'd raised for a future that never arrived. A man anchored to bricks and memories, wandering rooms that still held her shape. When he eventually died, the house didn't feel vacant. It felt interrupted. Those who tell the story say his grief clung to the place like cold smoke. So when the Flanagans moved in with their own plans and their own Christmas, they may have walked into the middle of someone else's ritual without knowing it. To believers, the hooded figure on Christmas Eve was that former owner or father, still trying to gather his family in the only way he remembered, by standing in the parlor on Christmas, waiting for people who weren't there anymore. To skeptics, the story is a classic haunting pattern. A lonely, creaky house, anxious children, and a long winter night combining into a powerful shared experience that grew with every retelling. Both readings say something important. One says grief can be stronger than death. The other says fear can be stronger than reason. Either way, the image that remains is the same. A hooded man in a parlor on Christmas Eve, ghost story or not. The Flanagan Christmas haunting has become a winter warning in some tellings. A reminder that when you move into an old place, you're not just buying walls. You're inheriting whatever stories still echo inside them. So if you find yourself in an old house this Christmas, listen to what it says when you turn the lights off. Most of the time, you'll hear nothing but pipes and wind and your own heartbeat. But somewhere in a town like St. Thomas, there's still a story about a family who moved into a red brick dream home for the holidays and learned it wasn't as empty as it looked. Whether you hear this as a haunting, a metaphor for grief, or just a cold night tale meant to raise the hairs on your arms, one thing is certain. On that Christmas Eve, the Flanagan family did not feel alone.